Well, it is 10 o'clock, which means it's time for me to welcome you to another Vinimark webinar. And we're now entering our third year of COVID restrictions and mandates. And Vinimark is taking a renewed look at the state of wine commerce in 2022. We're tracking the changes as they played out over the last 12 months, but ideally also preparing for what the next 12 months will hold. So to help us make sense of it all, we have gathered a panel of wine experts and consultants in order to share their insights on how consumer behavior has shifted and where it's shifting to. So our panel of experts include Sophie Jump, the current CEO of the International Wine Club Association, and also the founder of a fascinating conference called One Step Beyond, which seeks to spread the gospel of customer-centric marketing, which is something we've been speaking about quite a bit, but also talking about the application of cutting-edge innovation and technology within the retail, drinks, and hospitality industries. Then we have Eckhardt Gerber, the CEO of Vinimark, and Rico, Basson, the managing director of Vinpro, off the back of a seemingly quite successful Vinpro day, where the theme was revive, recover, and rebuild. So with that in mind, I'm wanting to start the conversation by asking Rico Basson to give us a little bit of context on where the South African wine industry is at right now. After all, if we are going to rebuild, then we need to know what ground zero looks like. So Rico, tracking from roughly 2019 through into 2022, what are the growth positions with regards to things like our total production, our total sales, and the shifts between exports and imports in South African wine?
Jono, good morning, and morning to all the listeners. Yeah, it's a tough question, and I'll keep it brief, and we can circle back again. Look, at best, if I look at the last 5 years, it's been a difficult roller coaster ride. I mean, we came from 2 years of climatic drought, then we saw great recovery, and then we entered into 2 years of financial drought with losing 200 trading days. And now we are in the midst of harvest, or we started harvest, and it's been a challenging season for the producers with heat waves. And I think it's going to be one of the most expensive production seasons due to the disruptions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So where we often see farm cost inflation at about 7%, it's going to be up at 15%. With prices not necessarily going above 3, 4, 5%. So yeah, one could spend a lot of time on that. Obviously, what happened in COVID, Jono, and I think there were a number of things which we, I suppose, underestimated and didn't see coming, and those would be things like glass shortages. I think the level of shipping disruption, and the magnitude and the port issues are well documented. I think that are additional challenges. And then I think the engagement with government was difficult all along the way, in the sense that we really struggled as an industry to get to decision-making structures as that. So the ultimate end of this was that we couldn't sell, and remember, we sell 50% of the product domestically, we export 50%, was that we saw a stock buildup quite significantly, where we normally carry about 4 to 5 months of sales, which is about 300-400 million liters. That number kicked up to 650, meaning we carry 9 months now. Good economic terms, that means one thing, and that is that the market dictates prices. So yeah, I think unfortunately on the commodity side, we most certainly saw pressure on cash flow. We saw prices at cellar door tracking down. And I need to unfortunately say we're not out of the woods. I think we are running a huge cash flow challenges still. And depending on the region, Jono, and depending on the business model, which varies significantly, I think that recovery will take 3 or 4 years with some tough decisions along the line. And then I think just a comment on tourism. Wine tourism, it is such a big part of our industry. 80% of our wineries are small or fairly small. That's about 400 of the 530. And they are hugely reliant on international tourists, and all that's well documented on travel bans. So silver linings, I think we'll come back to that. I think what was great about last year is we did saw recovery due to Eckhardt and his team, I suppose, doing what they do best. But also on export side, Jono, I think my biggest worry would be with that stock pressure is that we would start dumping product and actually nullify all the good work that we've done over so many years. And I didn't see that, which I think is positive. We stick to our guns. I think we did benefit last year from other countries such as New Zealand that couldn't deliver Sauvignon Blanc, from the Australian trade wars. And I think it's good to say, and we can be proud, that the wine exports went up to 10.2 billion. This is still the second biggest export commodity from agriculture in South Africa. And we managed to diversify into new markets as well. We saw good growth in Africa, Nigeria specific, good growth in China, and good growth in North America and the UK, and also very important cultivars. We really saw the trends that we've been speaking for so long on cultivar trends and price points and getting new listings. So perhaps I should stop there. I think a mixed bag, a structural damage, but recovery and rebuilding as we speak.
So would it be fair to say that we have seen quite a lot of discounting locally, but seemingly have managed to avoid that internationally?
I think so. Obviously, and I always say this, I think we get a bit lost between the domestic consumer and the international consumer. And therefore, I think part of our issues at the moment is when you look at our production side, it is very much still dominant by what I would call generic wines, Colombard, Chenin Blanc. A lot of that goes into the domestic market. I think what we did see, partly due to the glass shortage, Jono, but I think overall, in terms of affordabilities, we saw massive growth in bag-in-box domestically. Bag-in-box is now significantly bigger than glass, and that would have been 3 liters and 5 liters. And I think that is part of lack of consumer spend. I think it is convenience. Wine and white spirits like gin most certainly, Jono, benefited hugely from the at-home consumption trend. And I think wine as well in terms of e-commerce. So yes, two different markets. I think one should diversify between them as well. International, different. International, we managed to remove surplus wine by shipping a lot of industrial wine, which we don't call wine, I would call it something else. But we did not, as I said, make the good work that we've been busy with. We didn't, I think, discount it against that. And yeah, that would be my answer.
So, I mean, just referring back to the theme of Vinpro Day, which was the revive, rebuild, recover, it manages to sound catastrophic. It's almost revive like from the grave, but then also the kind of rebuilding, recovering there is a sense of hope within that. And I've been reading some of the other stuff you've been saying, talking about these green shoots of hope, and you have mentioned some of the silver linings, but can we talk about some of the innovations that you've seen? I mean, you mentioned them vaguely, but I'd love to hear specifics on what's giving you the hope in these areas.
Yeah, look, I tend to be a silver lining person, Jonas. So look, we often talk about our resilience, and I think as South Africans, we are very resilient. But I will add, without innovation, that doesn't mean a lot. So when you're in agriculture, like with wine, you cannot stand still. You need to progress and take it forward. So yeah, I think what we did on the part that you say is negative, the revival part, is we sat down last year and we recrafted a brand new plan on how will we recover and how will we collectively do that. So very specific detail in terms of our global markets, the discussion with government on market access, the domestic market, including tourism, which we I'll talk to just now, we are seeing recovery on. transformation, which is a big part, people development, and then obviously sustainability. So I think we're in for huge structural change, Jono, on business model level. What I'm very positive about is I am seeing wine businesses that are far more focused than ever before. We are seeing with that they are really, they know exactly what they want to do. They plant accordingly. And yes, we are planting vineyards. So let me not get too negative. But that's demand-led plantation. So we plant about 2,300 hectares still. Then mergers, acquisitions. I spoke in our day about foreign investment coming in, which I think is good. It's positive. I always refer to, in New Zealand, their top 5 brands, only one of them are owned by New Zealand. The other 4 are owned by international companies. Now, I'm not saying that's our way to go, but we're in a global environment. We need capital. And then I think, generally, the direct-to-consumer trend, we will further capitalize on. I think, as I said, it fits in well with wine. It is not only domestic, it's also international. And then I think what will stand us in good stead, Jono, is that one of the strengths of this industry has been plant improvements, varietals, making sure that we have drought resilient and cultivars out there. And I think that is playing through in a strength when we talk wine quality, when we talk innovation, when we look at site-specific production, which is really lifting the boat at the top, and I think making South Africa very, very interesting. And then talent and people. We've got amazing people. It's one of our biggest strengths, and we are utilizing that. So whilst one should be careful to generalize, Jono, it's fair to say that on the one side, there is a fallout, which is part of what I described. Yeah. On the other side, I want to say, let's not be too negative and critical. Let's have a little bit of self-confidence and focus on the good things, because that will stand us in good stead. And I'm seeing amazing things happening. So yeah, that would be my answer.
No, I mean, that is enormously encouraging. I mean, just the idea of a team of strategists sitting down, making a plan. I mean, I think that in itself is, often we see the chaos around us, but to know that there are people plotting the best course towards that recovery and that rebuilding is in itself comforting. So perhaps from that kind of broad overview, we can zoom in a little bit and turn the conversation to Eckhardt. You obviously have been driving Vinimark at the helm. I'd love to know, what are some of the giants that you've had to slay over the last 12 to 18 months with regards to your operations?
Thanks, Jono, and morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that everyone in the wine industry value chain has had their full of lessons learned and moments of perspective. And as Rico also said, I think we all like to take the opportunities from the tough times, but it's probably a little bit harder to have that philosophical view if the cash starts running out. Yeah, agreed that if we pull it a little bit closer, from a Vinimark perspective, we don't really deal in bulk wine, so it's really a case of sales and distribution for the wineries. And I think to a certain extent, many of the challenges that we encountered in 2021 was a bit of a hangover from the previous year. As you all know, we were again presented with 2 periods of prohibition stretched over some 7 weeks. We still had the curfews in place. We had the restrictions on trading times and hours. And I think what that meant for us very specifically as a company, and I'll get to the wineries in a bit, what it meant for us as a company is that, unfortunately, again, we suffered significant losses. You continue to pay for your inventories and your infrastructure, salaries, overheads, all of those, but you don't see the corresponding revenue from sales, of course. I think more than anything, it was incredibly tough on the sales teams. You look at the on-consumption sales teams in particular, that's really had a tough time. And you could really sense and see the despondence from them with every announcement of prohibition. a break in the momentum of sales, and them being unable to go and execute those well-laid plans to sell in the market. I think, as was the case for 2020, when we did reopen, it was a case of doing it responsibly. To a certain extent, many of the retailers, once prohibition is announced, they would typically stop making payments. That would kind of bring everything to a halt. And then when we reopened, it was kind of managing those orders, probably taking smaller orders, and really just managing the credit risk from that perspective. And I think that's probably one of the really positive aspects that's come out of the disaster of the last 2 years, is that despite all of that strife, and I think Rico mentioned resilience as well, what's been really encouraging has been that relationship, that close relationship throughout the value chain, where our customers really played their part in making sure that they settled their dues, and that we really kind of try to get back on track as best we can. Naturally, not everyone survived, and we know of that. But yeah, I think the challenges just kept on mounting for a little bit. Then we had the riots in Gauteng, and specifically in KZN. And that was massively detrimental. Some of those businesses decided not to reopen or couldn't reopen, and many of them are actually still rebuilding and in the process of reopening. I think for us as a wine company, our biggest concern still is for the wineries. I think we all know that wine is an incredibly patient business. And I think to some extent we haven't seen the full kind of flow through of the impact of COVID and the periods of prohibition. And I think for some time still, the impact on cash flow and profitability is going to be a real struggle for many of the wineries. Really some tough times. Then the other issues that we flagged in 2021, and that unfortunately I think is going to be with us for at least 2022, is the issues with the disruption in the supply chain, shortages of glass, packaging, capsules, and then just combined with that, as Rico also mentioned, massive inflation. I think the silver lining on that one is that for once it seems that we're not alone, and that even the rest of the world are experiencing the impacts of inflation. I think the US numbers are out today. They're expecting it to be above 7%, which is just for some perspective, a 40-year high for the US. So John, I think that's kind of the all the bad stuff there. And I don't know that we want to delve into any of those further.
Well, I mean, and I think, yeah, I think you're right. And that when I was in your warehouse a few months ago, just chatting to members of your team, for all that, they seem to have this level of optimism. They seem to be excited about opportunities that perhaps Vinimark had managed to position themselves for that others hadn't. And you also talked about just a slightly different ethos of taking care of your producers, which seems to have paid off in that you guys are in a solid position now. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the opportunities that you guys are excited about for 2022?
Yeah, I think it's probably a fairly simple philosophy, is that unless the wineries are sustainable, we're all in trouble. So I think the focus is very much there. So although we don't necessarily, as a sales and distribution partner, we don't necessarily experience all of the same issues that they do, invariably be impacted either directly or indirectly. And I think maybe to take it back, potentially not opportunities, but I think it's important to focus on the good. And we're excited about the harvest coming in. We had a couple of years of drought, and for the time being, we've got sufficient water. And although the weather patterns have been difficult for the guys to manage, I think everyone's excited about the harvest, and making some really exceptional wines. I think that's what South Africa should be known for, not for bulk, but for making really exceptional wines and doing really well. So I think the positives, absolutely, the harvests are looking good. And then I think some interesting things, maybe despite of COVID, or maybe as a result of COVID, wine seemed to grow its market share in the South African market. So that's really a positive. As far as the various channels are concerned, during COVID and prohibition in particular, or coming out of that, the independent retail did really well. We know that on-consumption was decimated to a certain extent, so the independents really picked that up. From a grocer perspective, and with promotions kind of to a certain extent taking a back seat, I think the bigger change focused really on the key value items, so those wines that would give them the biggest turnover or the biggest profitability. But again, I think the positive from that is that we continue to see the independents doing really well, but we're also seeing the recovery on the consumption side, although it's admittedly still quite slow. And also the grocer environment is picking up. Yeah, so touching on what Rico also said, we're very excited about wine tourism, and that's a really important aspect for South African wine in general, for both the domestic and the exports market. And then again, excited about innovation. Innovation, we always want it. We ask about it. We're not entirely sure always what it looks like. There's been some interesting developments in the market. I don't know whether you saw, but there's some of the alcoholic brands that have branched out into fragrances, perfumes. Some have branched out into clothing ranges, etc. So I'm not sure where wine's headed and whether they're ready to take the jump. We typically stay to packaging and pack sizes and all sorts of things, but yeah, it should be interesting. I think there's just a really positive air around the sales teams as general, and we're really excited about going forward. I think as mentioned before, the recovery is going to take some time, and it's not without its challenges, but certainly a lot on the upside.
Thanks, Eckhardt. I mean, it's exciting to hear what you were saying about wine having gained a little bit of market share. And I think it was Wine Intelligence who released a study based in the UK, which perhaps Sophie can tell us more about, that said the same thing, that wine seems to resonate with at-home consumption. I think gin was another one that resonated there, which means that for all people being stuck at home and not engaging with the hospitality or retail industries as much, at least there is that bounce back of people consuming more at home. But I want to move from local into the international scene. And so I want to ask Sophie to answer the next couple of questions, because Sophie, you get to take a kind of sneak peek into a bunch of markets around the world in a fairly detached fashion, I guess, which gives you better insight. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on interesting findings with regards to things like market share and consumption levels in specifically, I guess, the UK and the US, which are important markets for us.
I think, well, I mean, both Eckhardt and Rico have already touched on that. I mean, obviously the chat now is around, you know, whether the trends, the consumer changes that have been brought about by COVID, you know, will stay, whether they'll be permanent. And I think, obviously, you know, online e-commerce has absolutely blossomed everywhere over the last few years and accelerated. I think it was always going that way, but the acceleration has been huge. And wine fits in that, as you say, obviously the D2C space, but also, you know, people are shopping online, but also people are socializing online. And that's where we all come in, don't we? And I think that trend will still stay now, because the world is very international and it's very easily accessible. So, you know, I think that's been the main change in consumption, whether, I mean, people certainly in the UK and I think in the US and many markets, people have been consuming more. I think wine has been definitely one of the alcoholic beverages that, again, it sort of fits in with the home life that we've all been enduring for the last few years. So obviously technology goes with that. I mean, you know, Rico summed it up. The words that you said are the words, you know, the innovation, sustainability, D2C. These are the trends, and I think they'll stay. And both, you know, technology has accelerated as well in terms of advancement over the last few years through necessity. But.
Well, one of the trends you didn't touch on there was premiumization, which, if that's even a word, I feel like they've just.
I think it is actually, yeah.
It is now, yeah. And I mean, I find it somewhat confusing. I'm trying to make sense of premiumization. I mean, there's hard stats in the US to say that, like, it really is a big thing. The price per bottle spend is up 15% or whatever. But then wherever I look, I feel like people are saying that the consumer is under pressure. So what's your read on those seemingly contrasting statistics?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, people talk about it a lot, which is why it's become a word. I'm not sure really, because the wine business has always been split by the sort of high end and then the entry level. In the UK, I'm probably in the worst position to talk about that, because the UK is probably the tightest, stingiest market there is. We've got a very low average bottle price and some of the highest sort of import duties and taxes. So I think our average bottle price is still hovering around £6 in the UK, which is, it's most of that is tax and import duty. So I don't know. I mean, I think obviously people probably will spend more at home, or have been doing, because you can't go out. So, and it does seem now that we are going out, to pay. I'm talking about the UK, and I guess it's the same in the US, but, you can't get much, even in a pub in the UK, under sort of £30. Sorry, I can't. What's that? It's about R1 billion, isn't it? It's times 20 anyway, something like that. So it's hard to know whether I guess the question is premiumization all about the price, or is it about the quality of wine that people are seeking? And I think the wine consumer has never been in a better place internationally, have they? Because the amount of wine that we get for our dollars is extraordinary, because the quality in South Africa is a classic example. I mean, we were having a quick chat before, but South Africa obviously started making its name, I think, generally in export markets, and apologies if I'm sort of referring too much to my own market in the UK, but, made its name with cheap Shenans and basically sort of cheap bag-in-box and bulk wines. But now that definitely is not the case, and there's a big buzz around South African wines in terms of quality. Obviously, they're good value for money, so they're doing really well. So as I say, it depends really what you mean by premiumization, and the reality is you can get a bloody good bottle of wine from South Africa for a very decent price in most export markets, and that's one of your strengths.
Yeah. Well, one of the other trends that popped up in my research was the kind of diversification of regions, in that these consumers who are apparently under pressure are looking to lesser known regions. So obviously that, I think, is quite exciting for South Africa. But I was wondering, what do you think in a market that's doing that? What do you think some of the challenges that will face us? And can you give examples of markets that have perhaps been doing better at, or beating out the competition in this zone?
What, you're talking about regionalization? You see, I have a very simplistic view of consumers. I've always approached wine. We were talking about it yesterday. The trouble is there's too much. Wine people love wine and they talk about it. People that drink wine love wine, they don't necessarily want to talk about it. And I think, of course we love, drilling down into the different areas and the different soil types and everything else. But frankly, I don't think anybody else really does. So I'm from a very eclectic market. So obviously people know South Africa. I think people know, Cape Town, and probably heard of Stellenbosch, but it sort of stops there. And I don't know how far, obviously as a wine producing country, you want to make the distinctions between, the Swartland wines and Franschhoek and Paarl and everything else. In terms of the average consumer, I don't really think. I think what people have got to focus on is again, it's boring, but it's basics. It's quality and pricing, so quality and value for money. And in fact, one of the problems in the wine industry is there is so much choice, and it is a marketing fact that in a position of excessive choice, the consumer will go for what he knows and understands, and that's why big brands exist, and that's why they're so successful.
So I mean, if I hear you out, it feels like what you're saying is that simplification is actually really important if you're going to make headway. I mean, so the market might be diversifying, but you still need to create that sense of easy recognition.
Yeah, I think so. And also, you know, it's the same if you take clothes. I mean, this is my view, so I apologize, because a lot of, you know, my sort of pals in the wine world, you know, they have perhaps a more highbrow view of the average consumer. But I know, you know, for example, if you love lovely clothes and you love cashmere, well, you don't need to know how many hairs there are on the goat's chest that it's combed from. You just want to know that it's lovely cashmere. And it's the same with, I mean, a lot of my friends spend a lot more money than I do on wine because they got it, and also because they don't know enough about wine to know what the good cheap ones are. But I just think that, you know, even, I don't know, I have I think too much choice, too much talk about detail about a product. We don't talk about food as much as, we don't insist on talking about food as much as we do about wine, do we? You know, you have to have a certain glass, you have to have a certain temperature, you have to know about this and that. And I think that puts people off. And I think it's about, again, I go back to it's about the quality. And I think the other thing, sorry, you didn't ask that question, but I feel very strongly about it. And you were talking about bag-in-box and sustainability. This conversation has to become reality now, because apart from the fact there are glass shortages everywhere, as you say, you know, the consumers of the future need those sustainable credentials. They're no longer a luxury, are they? They're a necessity, both in terms of marketing and in terms of sourcing products. And I think we keep talking about packaging and innovation, but still nothing happens. You know, I think bag-in-box is where it's going. I've completely gone off the subject.
No, well, I mean, that's actually, look, I mean, I think that's really important. And especially, I mean, I wanted to ask you about, in your work with One Step Beyond, you obviously are at the coalface of these innovations that are helping producers get products to market. So I'd love to actually hear a little bit more about some of these technological innovations or packaging innovations that are perhaps changing the way producers get their products to market. Because for South African producers, we need all the input we can get in order to make sure we're on this creative forefront. So please tell us more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, well, as we all know, the thing is with the necessities are, you know, technology. I mean, we're always I think in the wine industry, we're always sort of catching up, because we're not known, and again, it irritates some people, but we're not known for our innovation and being ahead of trends in the wine business. I mean, that is a fact. We come from it's a farming industry. And I think people are embracing technology, but, you know, we saw it when COVID happened, you know, everyone suddenly scrambling to get onto the D2C e-commerce train, you know, and it's very easy and very cheap these days to put your wines online and have a basket and use Shopify. Then obviously the clever thing is about how you've got to reach your consumer. So technology and innovation are part of all sort of shopping experiences, and it's going, you know, it's like voice, it's like the hybrid living, it's the other things are the way you buy things, whether you're going to use, you know, blockchain. I mean, all of these things are changing the way consumers think about purchasing anything. And wine ultimately is just another thing that I think it's a necessity in life. Some people think it's a luxury, but I think you can't, you've got to try and keep ahead of the game. And I think packaging is the key thing. You know, for years and years and years, we talked about corks and screw caps, didn't we? I mean, that is probably one of the most boring subjects that we've, you know, swirled round and round and round forever. You know, the whole thing about nobody will ever have a screw cap. Well, obviously, I think the New Zealand wine industry helped everybody understand that we love a screw cap. But again, this packaging thing, the innovations are there. But if you look in the drinks industry, you've got to look, I think, at the beer industry and the spirits industries. You know, they are creating now sort of cardboard style bottles that are completely compostable, things like that. And again, the bag in the box, with all the issues of freight and everything else, I think this glass just has to stay for the sort of, in the same way as cork, I guess, for the really high end of the market. But technology and innovation will impact, because it impacts the consumer. And again, I think we start we seem to always leave the consumer behind when we're dealing with wine sales and marketing often. You know, if you take the sort of classic producers, it was, this is my wine, and if you don't like it, it's because you don't understand it and you're an idiot. Well, you know, that just doesn't gel anymore, because the consumer, you know, the power of purchase now is very much with the consumer, isn't it? Given the impact of social media. I mean, we were talking about it yesterday at a One Step Beyond conference, and there's I can't remember her name, but there's an influencer, an American girl, sort of 20-year-old, who has, you know, she's got more followers than the Pope, than Donald Trump, than, you know, a handful of sort of well-known people put together. And they were saying, you know, one tweet by her is the same, has the same impact as a sort of an annual marketing and advertising campaign would traditionally do. So I think, you know, these are the technological advances that we need to keep an eye of, but they're only important in as much as consumer behavior is changing with them.
I mean, I was wondering about that with the role of influencers in the new year. It feels like e-commerce has ballooned and there's a lot of wine being sold online. It would seem that in this context, content is more important than ever. And yet that whole influencer model essentially says, I'm going to put that in the hands of a third party. I'm wondering, should there not be producers taking more responsibility for their own content? Simply because instead of having a sales rep in a bottle store, which you're going to do less of, I mean, how are we going to replace that in the online space? Are you seeing some really clever examples of seizing control of your own public image online?
Well, I think, you know, any business, and I think, you know, wine producer is the same. You know, you have your corporate message and your corporate image, but again, everything is the power of the individual now, isn't it? You know, people aren't influenced anymore by big institutions, whether they're marketing institutions and agencies, or whether it's the church, whether it's politicians. People are now influenced by each other. You know, it's the sort of the power of the individual. And I think that, you know, producers have to work, they have to accept that and work with that. And however much, obviously they need to protect and project their own brand in the ways that they want to, but they also have to accept that more influential than what they're saying will be what other people say about their product. And it goes back to whether people like your product, and a product is not just the wine in the bottle, because actually that's the really easy part these days. You know, if you're not producing a decent wine, you really are in the wrong business these days. There's no excuse to produce rubbish. But, you know, you've got to have, people have got to like you as a business, you know, the same as you like a friend. They want to like your morals. They want to like your, again, the environment, sustainable credentials. They want to like whether you smile when you talk to them, all those sort of things. And you know, you just have to accept, you can't project your brand through yourselves anymore. You have to project it through the people that like your brand. So you've got to make yourself likable, just the same as when you go down the pub and you want to chat to some few strangers.
Yeah, well, I don't think that message can be overstated, is that there needs for all, we're very good at focusing on the product. We're very good, as you say, at talking about the soil and saying why we harvested it exactly the right ripeness, but consumers aren't necessarily there. So I think this is a hugely important point for producers to grasp. But I wondered if we could circle back, Rico, jumping off Sophie's notion of customer sentiment and having to have people like you, right? I mean, that essentially we're talking about customer demand. You also talked about cultivars that were exciting you, new cultivars that were being planted. What are you seeing? Which cultivars are you seeing having the biggest demand in international markets? Where has there been the most growth or the most positive sentiment with regards to the cultivars that we are exporting from South Africa?
Now you ask me a question, I'm going to put my foot into it. Hey, so
come on, put it in.
I don't know. Just to quickly circle back to what Sophie said on sustainability. I think I want to start off with rebuilding reputation, and I think that's almost what the two of you just spoke about. I think we're putting in a lot of work on rebuilding reputation, be that in terms of tourism, be that in terms of our ports and harbors. And I think it links onto the theme for Cape Wine, which the WOSA team is arranging in October, which is Sustainability 360. And I think Sophie's right that our demarcation one of origin system is largely a production system. We often confuse consumers with that. But again, it is a fantastic building block, Jonah, and I think credit must be given to regions such as Robertson in the way that Robertson region has used that certification to position something like Chardonnay, for example. And Stellenbosch won't like it, but we certify wine of Western Cape firstly, and then Robertson second, and then Stellenbosch third. And I think it's good that the region come through and do that. Jono, what we see on trends, again, when we look at the 90,000 hectares, it is obviously still dominated by Chenin Blanc as a big cultivar and on the reds cap. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is plantings of Sauvignon Blanc. And I think as a cultivar, Sauvignon Blanc at the moment is our biggest export varietal as a single varietal. But perhaps we often don't talk about our red blends. I personally think we are doing amazing things with red blends in the way we position. It is a significant part of our value of exports. So I think if we look at planting trends, then the top 3 or 4 would probably be still Chenin Blanc. Then Chardonnay, we do foresee possible shortages in a cultivar like Chardonnay coming through. It sounds strange when we talk surplus, but it's there. And then further down probably would be Cab coming back, and then Merlot. So I think it's this commodity industry shifting to really high-tech farming practices with virus-free cultivars and varietals, driven by brands. So back to what I said about plant improvement. So yes, we're seeing new varietals which we brought in, like Azatico. We're seeing Marcelin that's been released, I think by Waverly Hills last year, Grenache Noir, and then obviously, where I think is huge innovation is the things that the Old Vine project is doing with a cultivar like Chenin Blanc. We own Vititech, the nursery. We have cleaned a lot of that material, and it will commercialize again. And I think that's an exciting story. But back to reputation, Jono, it's up to us. Cape Wine sold out within 48 hours. So that's the level of excitement that we have to welcome the international trade. I think it's up to us to have consistent messaging, Jono, running up there. Every single exporter, every single winery need to tell the same story about what exactly is sustainability. And we've got fantastic things. We've got certification. We've got integrated production. We are leading the world on ethical trade and certification. We're still the biggest fair trade wine producer in the world. So it's a little bit back to consistency of message and back to self-belief. And then I do see the innovation. And again, I think don't underestimate our marketers. But it's all about focus. And if we get it right, Jono, we could cut the recovery from 3-4 years down to about 2 years, I think. But then we need to steer the course.
Well, I mean, that I feel is like the perennial challenge to marketers of South African wine, is that we've got these very simple messages like Chenin, Cabernet Sauvignon, and South Africa as a region, but we are so complex and so varied that it feels like the moment we simplify, we start to exclude parts of who we are. So I think that to me feels like I don't even know how to get my head around that. But perhaps we've got about 15 minutes left. I wondered if any questions from the panel members, if you'd like to pose to one another. I always think that's great if you guys bounce off each other. So now would be the time for that. if there are any. And I'm going to check if we have any questions from the floor. Okay.
Eckart's got I'm just going to jump in and help you out. I'm just to comment really about, because obviously you guys are in the industry. I mean, I've sort of oversimplified talking about, don't burden the consumer with information, but South Africa really is, certainly in the UK market, it has a very good image, and people realize it's not just Chenin, but you have got fabulous Chenin. So it's the same, as I was saying, I specialize in Argentine wines, and obviously it's Malbec there. You've got to use that. Obviously, it irritates people, the producers, when they've got Cabernet Franc, they've got this and that and everything else. But I think it's just a question in terms of your marketing and projecting your image overseas, of, really pushing behind what you've got, and then, adding on all the wonderful diversity to it. But certainly, I think you're definitely, in terms of your international image, going the right way. And people do know that there's a complex and diverse landscape out there to be discovered. And I think obviously there's a lot of empathy, apart from when we're playing rugby, between the Brits and the South Africans anyway. So it's all part of the image. But your wines, again, and it goes back to basics. You've got the quality. If you've got the quality of wines, you're halfway there, really.
So there is one question on canned wines. Question of, is this a product that, and I guess all three of you might be able to answer this, is this something that just gets talked about a lot in the media, and it becomes this echo chamber of, the media says it's the future of packaging, so therefore we talk about it a lot, so therefore it feels like it's a trend? Or are there very real sales spikes and growth in these categories? And I guess this could be to any one of you.
Well, certainly, John, I think, especially in the South African context, the advent of wine in a can or a single service, the timing couldn't have been worse, because as soon as we launched in the South African context, then of course we went straight into prohibition and COVID, where larger formats was the preferred choice, fewer trips to the shop, so to speak. It's an interesting question. I think it speaks to what Sophie was referring to earlier with packaging types, and the notion that wine must still come in glass as opposed to bag and box or into a can. I think we might have some, inadvertent move back to aluminium with the shortages in glass. I know that other alcoholic categories are looking at cans and aluminium just to get the sales through. And I think that probably speaks to a few issues. We spoke about premiumization earlier, and the fact that although we like to believe that premiumization is there, we see the significant growth in bag and box. I think in a South African context, certainly there are other issues that come into the premiumization. There's a question of aspiration on the premium side, and there's even potentially the health aspect, where many people have realized, I'd much rather pay and buy one bottle of really good wine as opposed to two, let's say, good wines. And I think in terms of the message to the outside world, as South Africans, I think we sell the people, we sell the story. I agree, we're making some fantastic blends. We know about the Syrahs from the Swartland, and I think from an exports perspective and getting our wines on that side, it's going to be more and more difficult to get the wine there in a heavy glass bottle. So I think I'm touching on a few topics at the same time, but there's probably got to be a realization that it's going to look different. If we want to be competitive on the international market, we're going to have to move towards net zero carbon. The message is important, and I think that's another challenge for the farmers, is that their farming and their production practices are for many of them, are going to have to change over the medium to longer term. And I think it's probably like planting a tree. It's too late. You should have done it yesterday, but certainly something that we should be looking at.
Yeah. So am I reading you correctly in saying that with regards specifically to canned wines as a product, we haven't really got a chance to test that properly, but because of the lockdowns and the prohibitions, is that accurate? An accurate reflection?
Our experience is primarily in the domestic market, where it's difficult because on the face of it, it does seem expensive and it does seem a little bit niche. So if you're going for a picnic, then the single service or the can really is convenient and makes sense. We know that in other markets, for instance, in Japan, the single service wine offering has been around for a really long time. So it's the notion of not opening a bottle of wine and wasting it. If you just want a glass of wine, let's go for it. But certainly in the South African context, I think it's been a bit stop-start. Certainly the guys that understand it and that just want one glass of wine per evening, it works for them. But I think it remains to be seen where it goes in the longer term.
And Sophie, would you say internationally there is definite growth in this category, or is it just there's growth because it's of a really small base? What's your sense of the future or even the necessity of wine in a can?
I think, well, again, and I would sort of expand that to whether it's wine in a can or bag in the box. And actually, you probably don't realize, Eckhardt, when you talk about bag in the box, you know, it's almost, it's sort of, you in your mind, it sounds to me like you're talking about bulk wine. But obviously, the issue is, it's the same with screw caps. We went through the screw caps and everyone was like, well, screw cap means cheap wine. Wine in a can, wine in a box means cheap wine. And what we've got to do as an industry, and it's our responsibility to do this, is to communicate that we're actually being sustainable, and it's nothing, it's not a reflection, the packaging is not a reflection of the quality of the wine inside. So I think cans, we say, oh, the consumer won't like it, but have we asked, you know, have we asked? It's so easy now, it costs nothing. You go do an online campaign and say to your consumers, will you buy my wine in a can, yes or no? You know, I've never seen a campaign online of people saying, do you think that buying wine in a box makes it, you know, sort of demystifies it or makes it seem cheaper and less worthwhile, yes or no? And I think most consumers now, as long as there's a reason for it, and again, if it's got sustainable credentials, it will be easy to sell. So my answer is yes, and I think single serves, wine in boxes, wine in plastic. And again, this is where technology and innovation needs to come in. You know, we need to find ways. And I understand that there's, you know, there's issues of, you know, of oxidization and all this sort of stuff, but they're all issues, I think, that these days we're perfectly capable of solving quite easily. So yes, cans, yes, boxes, yes, anything that can be recycled and that is friendly to the environment.
I think that little marketing campaign idea is brilliant because it ties in with what you were saying earlier about, you know, being likable or engaging and presenting or connecting with the consumer. Asking their opinion is probably a primary way of getting them to engage with you.
Yeah, and it's free, basically, isn't it? You know, social media, you know, this is the great thing about digital communications, is that apart from, they cost what time it takes for you to do them, which is basically nothing. But again, you know, you just start with the consumer. You know, what do you guys think? And the other, you know, the other issue we haven't touched on, again, in the whole thing, it's the vegan, it's the organic. It's people used to think organic produce meant that it was overpriced and dirty, and it's the same with wine. You know, we've got organic actually doesn't mean that we've done something silly or missed something out of the wines. What it means is that we're caring for our vineyards and our environment. Again, it's about communication, isn't it, and marketing.
For sure. Well, Rico, we've got one more question. I'm wondering if I can address it to you. There's a suggestion from Stanley Edwards talking about the need for an industry initiative along the lines of the Eat More Pork type campaign where large players work together to promote wine. Given the political climate, do you think something like that is something that we could do, or is it, or not? What are your thoughts?
I think yes. I think it is an opportune time. Again, I'm perhaps talking domestic market, Jono, when I say this. I think it's an opportune time for wine to reposition itself. We're not going to get away from the alcohol debate. That is what we produce. But I do think the positioning for wine should be agriculture, job creation, export orientated, premium, and then tourism. And I think what we in the domestic market should do is think about a category repositioning. I personally, if I look at research, there is a missing middle. I know Eckhardt might shake his head, but we are bottom heavy in terms of what happens. I think there could be 50, 60 million liters of wine that should go into the middle tier. But that might need a industry collective effort. And yes, there would always be voices against that. But I think we don't have the luxury not to act as a collective. And we do that within being responsible manufacturers. There's nothing wrong with that. And we'll do it in. So my answer is yes, Jonah. I think that those are discussions that are actually ongoing as part of repositioning and opportunities. Hey, we cannot continue to ship commodity wines and then hope that farmers will replant. That's just not going to happen. And we will have to face these harsh realities, but use the opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rico. I think that's us for today, I think. So unless there are any more questions from the panel? No? Well, great. Then we'll wrap it up. I really want to thank Rico, Sophie, Eckhardt. You guys have been amazing. Thank you for giving your time today. And it's just been invaluable to help us, I guess, better prepare, to give an idea of how to move forward in what has been a pretty tough time. I mean, just recapping on some of the things we've talked about, there is this definite drive towards sustainability, but that's not just environmental. I think in South Africa specifically, that is our human element as well, that we need to focus and invest in. Sophie talked about the power of likability and the power of the individual, which of course translates into brands needing to interact with their consumers now more than ever, especially in the online space. It sounds like there are a lot of exciting innovations with regards to packaging. Again, the jury is out with regards to what the consumer feels about these various formats, but the answer seems to be, well, go and ask them. And then it's really encouraging to hear Rico talk about the fact that there is a plan, that there is replanting, that there are exciting new cultivars, that internationally exports are relatively strong, given that we've had such a crazy year. And I think finally, the point that Sophie made about simplifying the message and trying to actually communicate where your consumer is at, rather than sometimes getting stuck in the weeds. So I think that sums up most of what we talked about today. Apologies if I've missed some elements, but thanks again for your time. For all of you who tuned in today, we really appreciate that. And just to remind those of you at home who enjoyed this conversation, there are a whole series of podcasts and webinars that Vinimark hosts. The webinars are all available on the Vinimark YouTube channel, and this one will be posted as well in time. And the podcasts are available not only on the Vinimark website, but also on the Vinimark Spotify and Apple podcast channels. So you can find those there, where we talk about similar topics with regards to the cutting edge trends in marketing and retail and wine science. So make sure you go and find those. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a productive week full of quality strategizing and high quality wine. Have a great day.